The Galactic Council was in uproar. The moment the transmission from the outer reaches of the galaxy was received, the message, a signal of unknown origin, yet undeniably urgent, echoed through every communication hub across the galaxy's vast expanse. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in a colossal chamber aboard the neutral world of Pyrrhion, a station floating in the silence between stars. The massive room hummed with tension as a strange unease settled over the crowd. The ancient species of the council exchanged nervous glances, while the younger ones whispered with curiosity and suspicion. On one side, the Veracians, a towering race of telepaths known for their wisdom and brutal pragmatism, argue for immediate action. The signal could be a warning. They claimed a trap set by a species unknown. They insisted the Council must deploy a fleet to the region in case a new war was looming. But the Selthor, a race of silicon-based beings who had once nearly wiped out all other life in their galaxy, scoffed at the idea. They had seen many such threats and were not convinced this one was any different. They proposed sending a single ship to investigate something smaller, more discreet, something that wouldn't tip the balance of power too quickly. As the debate raged on, a figure at the far side of the chamber remained quiet and observant. Her presence, nearly unnoticed by most, a human delegation, led by Ambassador Calder, stood at the back, not a part of the council, but invited as observers. Their people had only joined the galactic community a short while ago. Despite their potential, they were considered an unknown in the galaxy, a race whose past had been filled with violence and uncertainty. The other species couldn't decide if humanity was a dangerous unknown or a potential ally. Ambassador Calder listened as the Veracians and Selthor exchanged their arguments, neither side willing to budge. They had seen hundreds of similar signals over the years, and each had been treated with caution, but none had sparked such chaos among the council before. It was then that a voice broke through the din. Captain Ilara, west of the Airs, the ship humanity had selected for the mission, stepped forward, her voice steady and confident, cutting through the tension like a blade. "We will send only one ship," she declared, eyes turning toward her. The room fell into a stunned silence. "Only one ship." The Veracians exchanged glances, their brows furrowed with suspicion. The Selthor leaders eyed the human captain with a cold curiosity. Their instincts told them to be cautious. No one in the council had ever made such a bold claim, but Captain West was unshaken. She had expected the reaction and was ready for it. "The Airs will be enough," she continued, her eyes locking with the council members. "We have our reasons, but if you wish to understand them, you must trust us." That Selthor scoffed. "Trust you? And what reason would you have to send only one ship into the unknown to face a threat none of us understand?" Captain West's gaze remained steady. "Because that is how humans do things. We face the unknown head-on with everything we have, because our strength lies not in numbers, but in the courage to face what others fear." Murmurs filled the room as she spoke. The tone of her voice resonated with something unfamiliar to many of the species in the room, something they hadn't encountered before, a boldness, a sense of certainty that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You will regret this," one of the Veracian leaders muttered under his breath. But it was too late. The decision had been made, and the Airs was already on its way into the void, leaving the council behind to question whether they had just witnessed the birth of a new kind of power or the beginning of a reckoning. The Airs cut through the black expanse of space like a shard of steel, sleek and silent against the backdrop of stars. The crew aboard her stood in a state of uneasy anticipation. Despite their orders, none of them truly understood the purpose of their mission. They had been briefed on the signal, the enigmatic message that had caused such turmoil among the galactic powers, but the true nature of their task remained a mystery to them. Captain Ilara West paced the command deck, her boots clicking sharply against the metal floor, her gaze fixed on the starboard window. As the stars blurred into streaks of light, the hum of the ship's engines was the only sound in the room. The rest of the crew sat at their stations, their faces taut with tension, their fingers hovering above controls they didn't yet understand. "We're close," Lieutenant Juno Harrow, the ship's navigator, said, breaking the silence, her voice tight with stress. "We'll be within range of the signal in under 2 hours." Captain West didn't turn to look at her. Instead, she continued to stare out into the void, her mind racing as she considered the silence that had followed their departure from Pyrrhion, the sudden weight of being alone on this mission. No backup, no reinforcements, just them and the unknown. The mission felt different now that they were out there alone, cut off from the rest of the galaxy, with nothing to rely on but their wits and training. She felt the eyes of the crew on her, even when they said nothing she knew. They were all asking the same question: why only one ship? Captain, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. Maris Tane, the ship's chief scientist. She stood beside the central console, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with an almost preternatural grace. The signal is fluctuating. We're seeing some irregular patterns in its transmission. West turned toward her expression hardening. What kind of irregularities? Frequency modulation. It's shifting. It's like it's responding to our approach. Tane said, her brow furrowed, as if it's aware we're coming. The words hung in the air for a moment, and the hairs on the back of West's neck stood up, a chill creeping through her as she glanced at the rest of the crew, their eyes wide with concern. Any chance it's a trap? The Ares shuddered once more as the ship slowly righted itself, the blinking lights on the control panels casting an eerie glow across the faces of the crew. The tension in the room thick enough to choke on. Captain West's breath caught in her throat as she scanned the view screen outside the ship's hull. What had once been empty space was now filled with an immense, swirling mass, a massive structure of incomprehensible design floating in the void. It was an asteroid, or at least it resembled one. Yet it was far too perfectly shaped to be a natural formation. Its surface was covered in strange geometric patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the mysterious signal. The ship had been drawn to the Ares, was locked in orbit around the colossal object. With no way to break free, it had pulled them in with a force that wasn't just gravitational, it was something more. The moment the Ares crossed the threshold into the cavern, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the entire asteroid had taken a breath. And now, with them inside, it exhaled a heavy, almost palpable silence. The ship's engines hummed faintly, their vibrations swallowed by the vast emptiness of the cavern ahead. Captain West stood at the front of the bridge, her gaze fixed on the dimly lit expanse beyond the viewports. The walls of the cavern stretched upward in impossible proportions, smooth, angular surfaces that defied the laws of physics as they rose toward an unseen ceiling above their heads. Scattered along the floor were strange, metallic pillars that seemed to pulse with energy, sending out faint waves of light, as if responding to their presence. Is this even possible? Tane whispered from her station, her voice filled with awe and trepidation as she examined the cavern's structure through her console. I've never seen anything like this before. This place is beyond anything our technology can comprehend. West nodded, her expression hardening. She had expected the unknown, but this was more than any of them had imagined. Stay focused, she said, her voice calm but firm. I need all hands on deck. Prepare a landing party. Landing party. Commander Cole raised an eyebrow, his tone incredulous. You want to enter this place? Captain, we have no idea what's inside. I'm aware, West replied evenly. But we don't have the luxury of sitting back and hoping for answers to come to us. We need to find out what this structure is, what it wants, and what it means for the galaxy. Her words were met with silence, the weight of the situation settling heavily over the crew. But no one protested. They all knew the stakes. Lieutenant Harrow, West continued, her gaze shifting to the navigator, plot a course for the center of the cavern. See if we can find a safe place to land. Aye, Captain. Harrow responded, her fingers flying across her console as she manipulated the ship's trajectory. As the Ares descended deeper into the cavern, the ship's lights flickered once more, casting long shadows across the bridge. The walls seemed to close in around them, the pillars of energy growing brighter with every passing moment. Captain, Tane said, her voice tight with urgency, there's something down there. I think it's moving. Before West could respond, the ship lurched again, a sharp tremor running through its frame. Brace for impact, Cole shouted. The ship shook violently, the walls of the cavern seeming to constrict as though the very space around them had come alive. The instruments on the bridge beeped frantically, signaling a rapid loss of power. What the hell is happening? West snapped, gripping the arm of her chair as the tremors intensified. We're losing power, Tane shouted, her hands scrambling over the control panels in a desperate attempt to stabilize the systems. The energy field. It's interfering with the ship's core systems. We can't hold much longer. The airs veered sharply, its trajectory shifting unexpectedly, as if caught in an unseen gravitational pull. The ship's lights dimmed, and the emergency alarms blared, drowning out all other sounds. We need to land now or we're not going to make it, West barked. Harrow, her face set in grim determination, managed to stabilize the ship just enough to bring it to a rough landing on the cavern floor. The ship's engines screamed in protest before falling silent. The ship's once steady hum faded into an eerie quiet, and for a moment, everything seemed still. But then, just as the crew started to breathe again, the ground beneath the airs trembled once more, this time with purpose. A low, resonating hum vibrated through the ship's hull from deep within the cavern, and for the first time since they had entered, the crew felt it, a presence, something watching them. Everyone, stay alert, West ordered, her voice low and steady, but with an edge of command. Outside the viewports, shadows began to stir, moving with an unnatural grace. The cavern's pulse grew louder, and the crew could feel the weight of something ancient and powerful shifting beneath the surface. Something was about to wake up. The air inside the airs grew heavier, almost thick with anticipation, as the low hum reverberated through the hull like the beating of an ancient heart. Captain West stood rigid, her gaze locked on the viewports, watching the shadows outside shift and sway with a life of their own. The cavern's pulse was steady now, resonating through every inch of the ship, as though the very structure beneath them was stirring from a long, slumbering dream. Captain, the energy levels. They're off the charts, Tane said, her voice tight with concern as she stared at her console. I've never seen anything like this. The energy signatures are fluctuating. They're not just passive readings anymore. They're responding to us. West took a deep breath, trying to steady herself as the unsettling sensation of being watched crept over her. How long do we have until it becomes dangerous? She asked, her voice betraying none of the anxiety she was feeling. I don't know, Tane replied, her fingers moving over the controls in an attempt to understand the fluctuating data. Whatever's happening down there is unlike anything we've studied. We're still within the range of the energy field, but the longer we stay in this proximity, the more unstable our systems become. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the ship's corridors, a sound so loud and jarring it sent a jolt through the crew. Harrow, still at her station, whipped her head toward the viewports. Something's coming. I can see it moving. It's not just shadows. It's... Before she could finish, the ground beneath the airs trembled violently again, harder this time. The ship groaned, as if it were about to break apart, and the crew gripped their seats for stability. West's knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of her chair. Prepare for impact, West ordered. Get to the shuttle bay. We're going in. A murmur ran through the crew, but there was no hesitation. They all knew what needed to be done. This was no longer just about investigating a signal. It was about survival. They had to understand what was waking up beneath them and what had brought them here. West turned to Commander Cole, who was already moving toward the door. Stay sharp, she warned. We don't know what's waiting down there. Cole gave a grim nod, his face as stoic as ever. Understood, Captain. I'll make sure the landing party is ready. With a quick glance toward her crew, West followed him toward the shuttle bay. The rest of the crew was already preparing for the worst, gathering weapons and securing equipment. Every step felt heavier now, as if the ship was sinking deeper into the heart of the asteroid. Tension clung to the air like static electricity. The shuttle bay doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the sleek dropship that would carry them down into the cavern. As the crew filed into the shuttle, West noticed the unease in their eyes, the uncertainty they hadn't shown before. Each person here was trained for combat, for survival, but none of them had ever encountered something like this. "Are we sure about this?" Lieutenant Harrow asked as she secured herself in the shuttle seat, her voice laced with apprehension. "We don't even know what's down there, let alone what it's capable of." "We don't have a choice," West replied, locking eyes with her. "We didn't come this far to turn back now. Stay focused, all of you." The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and the ship's hull groaned again as the energy field outside seemed to tighten its grip. As they descended through the cavern's opening, the crew watched the viewports intently. The cavern was vast, the walls stretching endlessly above them, but it was the ground that held their attention. Slow-moving shapes, vast and seemingly alive, slithered and writhed in the shadows below. Then, without warning, a massive structure emerged from the darkness, something towering, its shape alien and ancient, covered in shifting patterns that seemed to pulse and move as if they were alive. The hum they had been feeling grew louder, reverberating through their very bones. West's heart pounded in her chest. This is it, the heart of it all. They had arrived, and whatever was waiting down there, it had been expecting them. The shuttle's descent was slow, agonizingly so, as though the cavern itself was reluctant to allow them entry. The ground below shifted in an eerie dance, shadows stretching like fingers reaching for them, pulling the shuttle in deeper. Captain West's eyes remained locked on the vast, impossible structure ahead, the colossal shape that seemed to pulse with life, as though it were both machine and organism, a hybrid of technology, and something far more ancient. "Prepare for landing," she ordered, her voice steady, though the knot in her stomach tightened with each passing second. The rest of the crew remained silent, their faces a mix of awe, fear, and determination. "Energy levels are fluctuating again," Tane reported from the comms link, her voice tight with urgency. It's reacting to us. I don't know how much longer we can stay in its range before the systems overload." "Noted," West replied, though she didn't turn her gaze from the structure. "We land, we investigate, we get out fast." The shuttle touched down with a soft jolt, its thrusters hissing as they cut off. For a moment, there was only the hum of the alien structure reverberating through the floor, the echoes of something far older than humanity's existence. West unbuckled her harness, her mind racing with the possibilities of what could await them. "Move out," she commanded, and the team quickly filed out of the shuttle, weapons drawn and scanning every corner of the cavern for signs of danger. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere around them was laden with something unknown. The floor beneath their boots was smooth, unnaturally so, with strange symbols carved into the surface, symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The landing party moved forward cautiously, their steps echoing as they advanced toward the monolithic structure. West's instincts told her to keep moving forward, but every fiber of her being screamed that something was wrong. Something was watching them. "Captain," Commander Cole's voice came over the comms, sharp and urgent. "We're not alone." West froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned toward him, her eyes scanning the shadows as the rest of the team halted in their tracks. The shadows, once static, were now alive, shifting, undulating. They were no longer just a trick of light. From the depths of the cavern, something emerged. A figure, or several figures, shaped like shadows yet impossibly solid. They moved with an unsettling fluidity, their outlines indistinct, as though they were both there and not there at the same time. The creatures seemed to coalesce from the darkness itself, their forms flickering like static on a screen. "Stay calm," West ordered, her voice steady, though her grip tightened around her weapon. "We don't know if they're hostile." The figures moved closer, their eerie, shifting forms growing more distinct with each passing second. Their faces, or what passed for faces, were devoid of features, a blank expanse of smooth, reflective surfaces. It was as though the beings had no identity, no expression, no meaning, just emptiness. The silence that fell over the group was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the structure behind them. The tension in the air was so thick it felt as though it could be cut with a knife. The alien figures stopped just within range of the landing party, standing perfectly still, their presence overwhelming, as if they were waiting for something. "Captain," Cole said, his voice barely a whisper, "what do we do now?" West's mind raced. Every instinct told her to act, to defend, to fight, but something held her back. These beings, whatever they were, had made no aggressive move, yet the unnatural stillness of their presence was terrifying, as though they were not just waiting for something to happen, but were also expecting something from them. The glowing symbols on the floor beneath their feet began to pulse in time with the hum of the structure, sending waves of energy through the cavern. It was as if the very walls of the asteroid were listening, reacting to the presence of these beings. And then, without warning, the leader of the shadowed figures moved forward, its shape undulating as it reached toward them, its form now more solid, more real than ever before. The air grew colder as it came closer, its shape merging with the shadows around it. "Don't move," West said, her voice barely above a whisper, her heart pounding as she stepped forward, preparing for whatever would come next. But deep inside, she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. Whatever this place was, and whatever these beings were, they weren't going to let them leave without revealing their secrets. The figure loomed closer, its movement almost imperceptible yet undeniable, as if it were drifting through time itself rather than space. The silence in the cavern stretched unbearably, the pulse of the structure's energy vibrating through the ground, through their bones. West felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a heavy cloak, each step of the shadowed figure echoing in her mind. It was like being trapped in a dream, an ancient, incomprehensible dream. The beam came to a stop just a few meters from the landing party, its form now clearer, more defined, yet still lacking any discernible features. The air seemed to crackle with energy, charged with something old and powerful. The symbols on the floor glowed brighter in response, their patterns shifting with an intelligence that felt unnervingly deliberate. "Captain," Cole whispered, his voice tight with tension, "do you think they're trying to communicate?" West didn't reply immediately, her eyes locked on the figure. She wasn't sure what they were dealing with yet, but she knew instinctively that this being, this entity, wasn't just a passive observer. It was here for a reason, and it wanted something. The figure raised a hand, or what might have been a hand, its appendage flickering between solid and transparent. It extended toward West, and she felt a strange pull, a magnetic force urging her to move closer. Her instincts screamed at her to resist, to take a step back, but the pull was undeniable. Something deep within her was compelled to approach. "Captain, don't," Cole said sharply, but his words seemed distant, muffled as though they were coming from far away. West's gaze remained locked on the entity, her body moving almost of its own accord, as though she were no longer entirely in control. Before she could take another step, the figure spoke. The voice wasn't a sound. There were no words, no language. Instead, it filled her mind, a presence that pressed against her consciousness, shaping thoughts into meaning. It was a communication that bypassed the need for sound, an intimate, direct connection that left no room for misunderstanding. "You have come." The voice was deep, resonant, ancient. It wasn't a voice at all, but a feeling, an impression, like the weight of 1,000 years settling upon her. "Who are you?" West's voice broke the silence, though it seemed insignificant compared to the profound presence of the being before her. Her heart raced as the words left her lips, the question feeling small in the face of such incomprehensible power. The figure's form flickered again, and then it spoke once more, this time with a clarity that filled the air around them, as if the cavern itself had spoken in unison. "We are the keepers. We are the ones who watch, who protect, who judge." West's breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers of ancient civilizations, of alien species whose technology spanned millennia, but nothing like this. These keepers, what did they protect? What were they judging? "Protect what?" she asked, her voice stronger now, fueled by the urgency of the situation. "What are you guarding?" The figure didn't immediately respond, its form shifting again, as if it were pondering her question. The silence stretched long, but in that silence, West could feel something else, an awareness, a presence that wasn't just watching them, but watching everything. The cavern seemed to grow even colder, the air thick with something heavy, a weight they couldn't explain. The balance, the voice echoed in her mind. We guard the balance. The cycle. The rise and fall of all things. West could feel the truth of the statement resonate deep within her, but the meaning remained elusive, as though she were standing on the edge of understanding, but could not quite grasp the whole picture. Before she could ask more, the figure raised its hand again, and the ground beneath them trembled in response. It was subtle at first, like a whisper, then stronger, like the entire cavern was waking from a long slumber. "You are not prepared." The voice grew more insistent, more urgent, as if warning her. But the time has come. The floor around them began to shift, the glowing symbols beneath their feet pulsing erratically. The air crackled, as though the structure itself were readying for something. West's pulse quickened, realizing the danger was now imminent. "Get to the shuttle," she shouted, her voice filled with the urgency of their situation. The beam's warning was clear, but what did it mean? The keeper had said they were not prepared, but for what? As the ground beneath them began to buckle, West's eyes met the shadows once again. The shape of the keeper faded, but the sense of imminent disaster lingered in the air. The cavern was no longer just a place of observation. Something was awakening, and it wasn't just the structure. It was something much, much older. Something that had waited long enough. And now, it was time. The ground beneath them trembled with increasing intensity, the cavern vibrating as if the entire asteroid was waking up. The pulse of energy, once steady, was now erratic, surging with violent force that made the walls groan and crack. Captain West's heart pounded in her chest as she signaled the crew to move. "Get to the shuttle. Now." West barked, her voice sharp and commanding as she turned toward the landing party, her pulse quickening in response to the rapidly escalating danger. Commander Cole didn't hesitate, his hand already on his blaster as he ushered the others toward the shuttle. The atmosphere was thick with tension as they sprinted toward the exit, but West's gaze was fixed on the keeper, the towering shadow that had warned them of something they weren't ready for. It was gone now, its shape fading into the depths of the cavern as if it had never existed at all. "What do you think it meant, Captain?" Lieutenant Harrow asked as they sprinted toward the shuttle, her voice tight with fear. "I don't know," West replied, her voice grim. "But I have a feeling we're about to find out." They'd reached the shuttle just as the cavern seemed to give one final earth-shattering shudder. The walls cracked, sending jagged pieces of rock tumbling down from the ceiling. The ground itself buckled beneath their feet, threatening to swallow them whole. West didn't waste another second. "Take off now," she commanded, her voice urgent as she strapped herself into the shuttle. The others followed suit, their faces pale with fear as they scrambled to secure themselves. Harrow's hands flew over the controls, her brow furrowed in concentration as she fired up the shuttle's engines. The shuttle's thrusters roared to life, lifting them off the ground just as the cavern trembled again. The roar of the engines drowned out the sound of the chaos unfolding around them, but West could feel the entire asteroid shaking as if it were alive, as if the whole thing were fighting to throw them out. The shuttle shuddered violently as the ground seemed to reach up toward them. "Get us out of here," West yelled, her voice strained as she gripped the armrests, her eyes scanning the readouts. The glowing symbols on the cavern floor were now pulsating wildly, lighting up the space like an angry storm. The walls of the cavern were closing in, narrowing as the structure responded to their departure. Whatever force had been keeping them in place was now fighting to retain its hold. "Engines at full power," Harrow called out, her hands gripping the controls tightly as the shuttle shot upward through the narrowing gap, toward the distant light of the exit. The walls of the cavern were closing in on them, the distance between them and freedom shrinking by the second. West's mind raced. The Keeper had warned them about the balance, about the cycle. What if the asteroid wasn't just a structure, but a trap? A prison for something? She couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just uncovered something ancient. They had triggered something. "Hold on," Harrow shouted, her voice filled with desperation as the shuttle veered sharply to avoid the collapsing rock. They shot through the opening, the narrow gap barely wide enough for the shuttle to pass. The shuttle's hull scraped against the jagged edges of the cavern, sending a jolt through the crew. With a final burst of energy, the shuttle broke free, emerging into the empty space beyond the asteroid. For a moment, everything was quiet. The ship's engines hummed steadily, and the crew exhaled in relief. "We're clear," Harrow said, her voice barely a whisper as she navigated the shuttle toward the Ares, which was still hovering in orbit above the asteroid. West stared out of the viewport, her mind spinning. Whatever had just happened, whatever force had been unleashed, they had only scratched the surface. The Keeper's words echoed in her mind, the cycle, the rise and fall of all things. "Report," she said, her voice calm despite the whirlwind of thoughts swirling inside her head. Tane's voice came through the comms, quiet but steady. "Captain, the energy readings. They're stabilizing, but there's a massive spike in the asteroid's core. It's like something is being activated." The message was clear. The danger wasn't over. West's eyes narrowed. "Set a course for Pyrrhion. We need answers, and we need them now." As the shuttle turned away from the asteroid, West looked back one final time. The massive structure seemed to pulse with renewed energy, the once dormant signs of life now active. The Keeper had said they weren't prepared, but if there was one thing West was certain of, it was that the galaxy wouldn't be prepared for what was coming next. The cycle had begun, and they were caught in the middle.